to locate and destroy Collins and his organization. Inevitably, Collins got wind of this dangerous expedition. He investigated and then called a final meeting here at Vaughan's Hotel on Saturday night, November the 20th, 1920. On Sunday, November the 21st, Michael Collins sent out 8 groups of his men who called on these English spies, etc., in their various lodgings throughout Dublin, and Collins' men then summarily and messily executed 14 of them. The English auxiliaries reacted in their own way. Lorry loads of them drove up here to Croke Park in the afternoon, where a large crowd of Irish people were watching a football match. The auxiliaries pointed their machine guns and fired point blank. 14 persons, men, women, and children were killed, including one player on this spot. And then Michael Collins was informed that the auxiliaries had captured 2 of his best men, Peter Clancy and Dick McKee, together with a totally innocent young man, Connor Clune. Collins was horrified at their potential fate at the hands of the raging auxiliaries. Sean Kavanagh was in Vaughan's Hotel that evening, sitting next to Connor Clune. Sean Kavanagh's fate that night was precarious. Sean Kavanagh, agent and train raider for Michael Collins. Collins sent for his double agent, Detective David Nelligan, and asked him to find out where the auxiliaries were holding Clancy and McKee. David Nelligan bluffed his way into Bridewell prison and hurried from cell to cell. They were not there. The 3 prisoners were here in this guard room of Dublin Castle, and in this room they were obscenely tortured by a Captain Hardy and his auxiliary associates. The 3 men crawled to this fireplace, and it was here on this spot that they were finally killed. Mr. Edward Lane was, indeed still is, one of Michael Collins' men, and he today looks after this room. An astounding end to this dreadful story is that on the day of the funeral, here in the pro-cathedral Dublin, with detectives on the lookout in every corner, Michael Collins suddenly appeared from amongst the mourners, dressed in a trench coat, they say, and pinned a note on the coffins. The note read, "In memory of 2 good friends, Dick and Peter, and 2 of Ireland's best soldiers, Michael Collins, 25th of November, 1920. And then the big man was gone. And in Brixton Prison, England, Terence McSweeney, Lord Mayor of Cork, had gone on hunger strike. And good old Winston Churchill made one of his famous jokes. He said, it was during the silly season the Lord Mayor of Cork announced his determination to starve himself to death. He did not want to die. After 6 weeks fasting, the Lord Mayor of Cork is still alive." And then Terence McSweeney died for his principles, and Winston Churchill apparently lacked the grace to apologize. 1 month later, on the 23rd of December, 1920, Lloyd George took the most terrible political action. Against the will of the vast majority of the Irish people, he divided the country into 2 parts, Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. He did this for strategic and economic reasons and to appease the primarily Protestant Scottish settlers of the northeast. Expediency rarely settles anything. Lloyd George. Michael Collins described this division, the border as it is now called, as this plunderous and impossible act. Around the world, people were shocked at England's brutal oppression in Ireland, and even Lloyd George had had enough. And he asked Eamon de Valera to agree to a truce which was finally arranged to begin on July the 11th,
1921. Most people were relieved at the truce, but not the English chief of the Imperial General Staff, General Sir Henry Wilson, and not Michael Collins. General Wilson was frustrated. It stopped him exterminating the Irish rats, as he insisted on calling the Irish patriots.
And Michael Collins realized what the truce could do to his underground freedom fighters. He said that as extermination for us, if the truce should fail, we shall be like rabbits coming out of their holes.
But the truce did not stop General Wilson making his extermination calculations. Very interesting and surprising calculations to exterminate rats. General Wilson said, we shall want 100,000 to 200,000 men in 1 or 2 years to stamp out the murder gang and re-establish law and order. Old General Wilson was a right old empire builder, wasn't he? Getting on for 250,000 soldiers in 2 years to destroy a so-called murder gang. Oh, what a bully boy. Mark you, General Wilson had never been a sensitive lad. During the First World War, he had lost over 1,000 of his men on one single day, and he had described that as a nasty little knock. Of course, one of the optimistic facts about human affairs is that it usually takes a lot of people on the wrong side to beat a few people on the right side. By the way, I am afraid the truth is that Michael Collins gave General Wilson himself a nasty little knock. He had him shot dead outside this is house here in Belgravia, the posher part of London.
But the truce had not helped the Catholics in Northern Ireland. With its coming, Catholics were murdered and removed from their homes and jobs. Michael Collins remarked that the truce had broken out up there. De Valera wrote to Lloyd George on the subject of Northern Ireland. We cannot admit the right of the British government to mutilate our country, neither in its own interest or at the call of any section of our population. Michael Collins appealed to the Protestants of Northern Ireland, quote, to join with us as Irishmen, to come into the Irish nation, to come in and take their share in the government of their own country, unquote. C.P. Scott, the great Manchester journalist, appealed to Lloyd George personally. He told him that the Northern Ireland government was not fit to govern, of the formation of a dangerous Protestant police force, of the expulsion of thousands from the shipyards simply because they were Catholics. And Lloyd George did nothing. Eamon de Valera, who has always behaved with the careful subtlety of a Jesuit, and Lloyd George, who always behaved like a political Billy Graham, and I don't mean that as a compliment, had long chats together here in London. Finally, Lloyd George issued an invitation to the Irish rebel government to attend a conference in London on October the 11th, 1921, to try and settle the sickly truce. De Valera accepted with ever so carefully selected words.
The Irish Republic would be glad to discuss this question with the community of nations known as the British Empire.
But who would go to this conference? Well, Eamon de Valera was in a dodgy predicament, but then he was the expert in getting out of dodgy predicaments, whether they were English firing squads or English jails, and now a cunning Welsh Prime Minister. You see, Eamon de Valera had stated that he was a Republican, and he knew very well from his chats with Lloyd George that the English would not allow Ireland to become a republic. And he also knew that it would be very bad for his political future to fail. So he simply refused to go. And then there was the uncompromising Republican, Karl Brewer. Well, he had 25 good bullet reasons not to look at any Englishman unless it was to kill him. Indeed, Karl Brewer, at the height of the English atrocities here in Ireland, had put forward a serious proposal that the entire British cabinet should be assassinated. By rota, Michael Collins turned on his old comrade and said, "You get none of my men for that." And Karl Brewer made the sinister reply, "I don't need any of your men." And so Eamon de Valera pointed